As the sun set on Route 66, a lone car raced down a deserted highway. Behind the wheel was a young woman named Emily, her heart racing with excitement as she embarked on her first solo road trip. The radio blared her favorite tunes, but as the miles ticked by, the sound started to wane, replaced by the clunking and whirring of her aging car. Emily's excitement quickly turned to panic as her car shuddered and came to a halt on the side of the road. She tried to start the engine, but the car remained stubbornly silent. With no cell phone signal and no cars in sight, Emily was alone on the desolate highway with nothing but her thoughts to keep her company. As the night fell, Emily found herself becoming more and more uneasy. She tried to shake off the feeling, but the darkness seemed to swallow her up. She peered out into the night, her eyes straining to see through the gloom. That's when she noticed something strange in the distance. It was a dim light flickering in the darkness. Emily's heart raced as she stepped out of her car and started to walk towards the light. As she got closer, she realized that it was a dilapidated old house, long abandoned and shrouded in cobwebs. Emily hesitated, but her curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed open the creaking front door. The inside of the house was just as decrepit as the outside. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the air was heavy with the scent of mildew. Emily's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of the ordinary. And that's when she saw a pile of old photographs stacked in a corner. Emily picked up the photos and started to flick through them. As she did, she realized that they were all the same woman who looked purely like her. Emily's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the photos, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Just then, she heard a creaking sound, and she spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. There, standing in front of her, was an old woman dressed in rags and staring at her with cold, dead eyes. Emily's voice caught in her throat as she backed away from the woman, but she didn't move. Instead, she just stood there, staring at Emily with a strange intensity. After what felt like an eternity, the old woman finally spoke. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice hoarse and barely audible. Emily's mind raced as she tried to process the woman's words. "Waiting for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old woman nodded, her eyes still fixed on Emily. "Yes, waiting for you," she repeated. "I knew you would come." Emily didn't know what to say, so she just stood there, staring at the old woman in stunned silence. And as she did, she realized that the photos she had found weren't just of any woman. They were of her grandmother, who had disappeared on Route 66 more than 50 years ago. As the old woman continued to stare at her, Emily knew that she had stumbled upon a long-buried mystery, one that would haunt her for years to come. As she fled from the house, Emily's heart was pounding in her chest as she raced back to her car, her mind racing with questions. Who was the old woman? Why did she have photographs of her grandmother? And what had happened to her all those years ago? As she drove away, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced in her rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the old woman was still there, somehow following her down the road. The miles ticked by as Emily drove on, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought about stopping at the next town to ask about her grandmother, but the thought of the old woman's stare made her uneasy. So she kept driving, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. As the sun started to rise, Emily finally reached a small town. She'd pulled into a gas station and filled up her tank, then went inside to ask about her grandmother. The old man behind the counter listened to her story, his eyes growing wide with surprise. "I remember your grandmother," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "She was a lovely woman, always smiling and laughing. But she disappeared one day, and no one ever knew what happened to her." Emily's heart sank as she heard the man's words. She had always known that her grandmother had vanished on Route 66, but hearing someone else confirm it made it all too real. As Emily continued her journey, she found herself thinking about the old woman and her grandmother. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected somehow, that the old woman knew more than she was letting on. Days turned into weeks as Emily drove on, each mile bringing her closer to the truth. She talked to anyone who would listen, asking about her grandmother and the old woman, but no one seemed to know anything, and Emily was starting to lose hope. And then one night it happened. Emily was driving down Route 66, the moon high in the sky, when she saw the flickering light in the distance again. This time, though, she didn't hesitate. She pulled over and walked towards the old house, her heart pounding in her chest. As she pushed open the door, she saw the old woman sitting in a chair, staring at her with those same dead eyes. Emily took a step forward, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Please," she said, "please tell me what happened to my grandmother." The old woman just stared at her, her expression unreadable. And then finally she spoke. "I was the last person to see your grandmother alive," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was driving down this road, just like you are now. And then she disappeared. No one knows what happened to her." Emily felt her heart sink as she heard the old woman's words. It was the same story she had heard 1,000 times before. But then the old woman spoke again, her voice soft and gentle. "But I think I know what happened to her," she said. "I think she found something she wasn't supposed to find. And I think she paid the price for it." Emily's mind raced as she heard the old woman's words. What could her grandmother have found? And who would have wanted to hurt her because of it? As she drove away from the old house, Emily knew that she was closer than ever to solving the mystery, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter what it took. She drove on, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, searching for the answers that had eluded her for so long.